Morning, Nav. How you doing?
I'm doing well. So before we get into this conversation, I was hoping you can paint us a picture of the current encampment issue that exists within Midland.
Sure. Well, we have pockets of encampments. We don't have the large sort of scale ones you'd see down in Hamilton or Toronto, but we have pockets settled all throughout green spaces in our community. They really kind of dry up over the wintertime, and we have to clean them out in the spring because there's a lot of refuse and biohazards left behind. But then in the spring, we start to get them back again, and that's happening now. We've got encampments, growing in our community. So we really didn't have any option to clear them out until this bill was passed.
So how can Bill 6 help municipalities like yours better handle this problem?
Well, the reality is it's the stick that we've been looking for, and we don't lead with stick, or we shouldn't. We lead with carrot, and we have coordinated access to shelter systems, supportive housing, mental health supports, creation of parole office, naloxone clinics. We really have the full mixed bag, which are why people, I would argue some of them come to Midland specifically to choose to be homeless in Midland because we have this plethora of services. But we didn't have any way to deal with the folks that are just not behaving, or their substance abuse, that happens unchecked in public areas in our downtown area, around our churches and around our schools. There really wasn't much. The police were saying, listen, there's not much we can do about this. So I look at this from two lenses. The clearing out encampments is a great last resort when we try and shepherd people into the services that do exist, even if that means moving out of our community through coordinated access. And for the ones that just will, abjectly refuse to leave these public spaces and live how they want, and they feel it's their God-given right, well, now there's an option to reclaim our public spaces for the families and kids and everyone else that wants to use it. So just the second half is the open drug use. And it's not fair to paint every homeless person as a drug addict or having mental health issues. A lot of the open drug abuse issues we were having in our core were actually from locals here who I dealt with many years, through my law enforcement career. So it's unfortunate that people tend to tar them all together, but that isn't the case.
Just to put things into perspective when it comes to this bill allows police to confront, arrest, and fine anyone they suspect of using drugs in public. This is up to $10,000. Now, when you consider homeless people, most homeless people don't even have IDs, let alone that kind of money. So can you realistically expect them to pay the fine or for the fine to effectively work as a deterrent?
No, I don't think the fines are going to be deterrents for homeless folks at all. I mean, to your point, they don't have ID. They're not renewing driver's licenses. They're not, any of the normal collection mechanisms don't exist. But ultimately, the fine, that's the part that the judicial system hands out. For the ability for police to actually confront somebody and try and change their behavior, which isn't instantly arrest and fine. It's, use a number of different avenues before the actual arrest and fine happens to try and convince people that if they don't move along or they don't stop this behavior that's not allowed, that there will be consequences. And prior to this, it seemed like even though open drug use was always being illegal, people have been living consequence-free, and they knew this. And so the police knew that nothing was happening in courts, and it became this cycle of, never mind, drive on kind of thing.
So police can break up encampments, but then what happens after? Because unless shelters or services are readily available for the homeless folks, they likely will just set up a tent somewhere else, and the chase sort of continues. Yeah. So you mentioned Midland having resources available. Do you have enough resources available to constantly handle this?
No, I don't think there will ever be enough resources. The need outweighs the capacity at every angle. But we do have a coordinated access system through the county, and our lower shelter typically runs at capacity. There are shelters throughout the county, and it would just mean that a ride would be for those that are willing, because you can't force people into shelter. Those that are willing, we will move them to another location where there is an open bed. And then the goal is on that continuum of housing to get them into supportive and housing and the wraparound services that come with that transitional supportive housing. That's what there's a gap on. We don't have enough of that. No community does. And that's where we were pressing the government, not just for the stick, but we need more housing money, and we need the ability to stand that housing up. I need the NIMBY arguments against new housing in our community to settle down and realize that those kind of people might end up living in your neighborhood, but they got to live somewhere, because we're supposed to embrace the housing first strategy, which means you're never going to get better or have any opportunity to heal until you have a roof over your head. You just can't live unhoused.
And that's a very interesting perspective that you bring up, Mayor Gordon, because earlier in the conversation you mentioned how you've worked with municipal police for years before you became the mayor. Was there anything in particular that you learned during that experience about homeless encampments and enforcement that has really stuck with you as you progressed in your career?
Well, I think empathy. I mean, these are all human beings. They all have a story. Matter of fact, we were just sharing this morning in a morning meeting. Nobody's there because they want to be. And not everyone's ready for help. And one thing that's been proven over time is you can't force somebody into treatment. I mean, technically you can. But when they get out, if they go back to the same old location, the same old people, and the same old lifestyle, they're going to fall right back into their addictions and other problems. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of rinse and repeat. Some will achieve successes as they get into shelter, perhaps in a transitional housing, and then they'll relapse and they go right back. And it's a circular thing, and it's just there's way more need than there is capacity, which is why the primary press in that letter that many of mayors signed was a plea for more funds for housing and more shelter. But that's the carrot part. And then we also needed the sticks. So for the people that abjectly refuse or just are not in the right place, we have to keep our communities safe. I mean, to quote Spock, as geeky as this sounds, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. And my role in governance is to make sure the needs of the many in our community are looked after while not abandoning, but holding the few that are outliers that don't want to live by the rules, hold them accountable.
That empathy piece that you mentioned is quite interesting because I'm wondering, Mayor Gordon, how you go about handling conversations with those groups that have opposed Bill 6. We spoke to a group last week from Kingston that was heavily opposing Bill 6 and feeling that it was infringing on the rights of these people. So how do you sort of lead in those situations when dealing with the opposition using empathy as your approach?
Well, I mean, you're right. It's hard to square that circle because they're not wrong. The opposition isn't wrong. They're right. The problem is we need to find a balance. It can't be all one or all the other. Doing nothing and just letting people live however they want, do drugs where they want, run up and down the screen half naked, screaming at people. That can't be tolerated in our society. However, there needs to be an option offered to them. So we don't have Gestapo-type policing in Canada, thank goodness. So you don't see police immediately running and arresting everybody. They may arrest you for disturb the peace, which is usually what's going on when these things are happening in our cores. But that's not a charge. That's just an arrest. That stops the behavior in the moment, gets you out of that situation, gives you a chance to calm down, see what services are offered through our social network and our 2-on-1 network through our county, which is like our region up here, and try and stop the behavior from continuing. It's a pattern, and it's a balance. And doing nothing wasn't working clearly. The existing tools we had wasn't working. So here's something new. Is it all 100% right? No, of course it isn't. The solution, is more housing, more supportive housing, and more mental health framework stuff. Getting tougher on drug dealers, making access to drugs, not as profitable and lucrative. But a lot of these things are kind of Pollyannish dreams, but we can still aspire.
Mayor Gordon, we'll leave it there, but thank you so much for your time today.
All right, thanks for the opportunity. Cheers.